Robert Schumann was a German composer and influential music critic. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest composers of the Romantic era. Schumann left the study of law, intending to pursue a career as a virtuoso pianist. He had been assured by his teacher Friedrich Wieck that he could become the finest pianist in Europe, but a hand injury ended this dream. Schumann then focused his musical energies on composing. Schumann's published compositions were written exclusively for the piano until 1840. He later composed works for piano and orchestra. Many lieder, 4 symphonies, an opera, and other orchestral, choral, and chamber works. Works such as Kinderszenen, Album für 1/4 die Jugend, Blumenstück 1/4 ck, Sonatas and Albumblätter are among his most famous. His writings about music appeared mostly in the Neue Zeitschrift für 1/4 Musik, a Leipzig-based publication which he jointly founded. In 1840, against the wishes of her father, Schumann married Friedrich Wieck's daughter Clara, following a long and acrimonious legal battle, which found in favor of Clara and Robert. Clara also composed music and had a considerable concert career as a pianist, the earnings from which formed a substantial part of her father's fortune. Schumann suffered from a lifelong mental disorder, first manifesting itself in 1833 as a severe melancholic depressive episode, which recurred several times alternating with phases of a exaltation, a unregistered trademark, and increasingly also delusional ideas of being poisoned or threatened with metallic items. After a suicide attempt in 1854, Schumann was admitted to a mental asylum, at his own request, in Indenisch near Bonn. Diagnosed with psychotic melancholia, Schumann died 2 years later in 1856 without having recovered from his mental illness. Biography. Early life. Schumann was born in Zwickau, in the Kingdom of Saxony, the fifth and last child of Johanna Christiane and August Schumann. Schumann began to compose before the age of 7, but his boyhood was spent in the cultivation of literature as much as music, undoubtedly influenced by his father, a bookseller, publisher, and novelist. Schumann began receiving general musical and piano instruction at the age of 7 from Johann Gottfried Kunz, a teacher at the Zwickau High School. The boy immediately developed a love of music and worked at creating musical compositions himself, without the aid of Kunz. Even though he often disregarded the principles of musical composition, he created works regarded as admirable for his age. The Universal Journal of Music 1850 supplement included a biographical sketch of Schumann that noted, "It has been related that Schumann, as a child, possessed rare taste and talent for portraying feelings and characteristic traits in melody, he could sketch the different dispositions of his intimate friends by certain figures and passages on the piano so exactly and comically that everyone burst into loud laughter at the similitude of the portrait." At age 14, Schumann wrote an essay on the aesthetics of music and also contributed to a volume, edited by his father, titled Portraits of Famous Men. While still at school in Zwickau, he read the works of the German poet-philosophers Friedrich Schiller and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, as well as Byron and the Greek tragedians. His most powerful and permanent literary inspiration was Jean-Paul Friedrich Richter, known simply as Jean-Paul, a German writer whose influence is seen in Schumann's youthful novels Jungusabend, completed in 1826, and Céline. Schumann's interest in music was sparked by seeing a performance of Ignaz Moscheles playing at Karlsbad, and he later developed an interest in the works of Ludwig van Beethoven, Franz Schubert and Felix Mendelssohn. His father, who had encouraged the boy's musical aspirations, died in 1826 when Schumann was 16. Neither his mother nor his guardian thereafter encouraged a career in music. In 1828 Schumann left school, and after a tour during which he met Heinrich Heine in Munich, he went to Leipzig to study law. In 1829 his law studies continued in Heidelberg, where he became a lifelong member of Corps Saxe Borussia Heidelberg. 1830 During Eastertide 1830 he heard the Italian violinist, violist, guitarist, and composer Nicolas Squared Paganini play in Frankfurt. In July he wrote to his mother, "My whole life has been a struggle between poetry and prose, or call it music and law." By Christmas he was back in Leipzig, at age 20 taking piano lessons from his old master Friedrich Wieck, who assured him that he would be a successful concert pianist after a few years' study with him. During his studies with Wieck, Schumann permanently injured his right hand. One suggested cause of this injury is that he damaged his finger by the use of a mechanical device designed to strengthen the weakest fingers, a device which held back one finger while he exercised the others. Another suggestion is that the injury was a side effect of syphilis medication. A more dramatic suggestion is that in an attempt to increase the independence of his fourth finger, he may have undergone a surgical procedure to separate the tendons of the fourth finger from those of the third. The cause of the injury is not known, but Schumann abandoned ideas of a concert career and devoted himself instead to composition. To this end he began a study of music theory under Heinrich Dorn, a German composer 6 years his senior and, at that time, conductor of the Leipzig Opera. About this time Schumann considered composing an opera on the subject of Hamlet. Papillons, the fusion of literary ideas with musical ones known as program music may be said to have first taken shape in Papillons, Op. 2, a musical portrayal of events in Jean-Paul's novel Die Flegeljahr. In a letter from Leipzig dated April 1832, Schumann bids his brothers read the last scene in Jean-Paul's Flegeljahr as soon as possible, because the papillons are intended as a musical representation of that masquerade. This inspiration is foreshadowed to some extent in his first written criticism, an 1831 essay on Frau Copyright Dauer Copyright Chopin's variations on a theme from Mozart's Don Giovanni, published in the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung. Here Chopin's work is discussed by imaginary characters created by Schumann himself, Florestan and Usbus the counterparts of Wald and Walt in Flegeljahr. A third, Meister Raro, is called upon for his opinion. Raro may represent either the composer himself, Wieck's daughter Clara, or the combination of the two. In the winter of 1832, Schumann, 22 at the time, visited relatives in Zwickau and Schneeberg, where he performed the first movement of his symphony in G minor. In Zwickau, the music was performed at a concert given by Clara Wieck, who was then just 13 years old. On this occasion Clara played bravura variations by Henri Hertz, a composer whom Schumann was already deriding as a Philistine. Schumann's mother said to Clara, "You must marry my Robert one day." Although the symphony in G minor was not published by Schumann during his lifetime, it has been played and recorded in recent times. The 1833 deaths of Schumann's brother Julius and his sister-in-law Rosalie in the worldwide cholera pandemic brought on a severe depressive episode. The composer made his first apparent attempt at suicide. Die Neue Zeitschrift für Orchestral Musik, by spring 1834, Schumann had sufficiently recovered to inaugurate Die Neue Zeitschrift für Orchestral Musik, first published on April 3, 1834. Schumann published most of his critical writings in the journal, and often lambasted the popular taste for flashy technical displays from figures whom Schumann perceived as inferior composers. Schumann campaigned to revive interest in major composers of the past, including Mozart, Beethoven and Weber, while he also promoted the work of some contemporary composers, including Chopin and Hector Berlioz, whom he praised for creating music of substance. On the other hand, Schumann disparaged the school of Franz Liszt and Richard Wagner. Among Schumann's associates at this time were composers Norbert Bergmann and Ludwig Schunck. Schumann's editorial duties during the summer of 1834 were interrupted by his relations with 16-year-old Ernestine von Fricken the adopted daughter of a rich Bohemian-born noble to whom he became engaged. Having learned in August 1835 that Ernestine von Fricken was born illegitimate, which meant that she would have no dowry, and fearful that her limited means would force him to earn his living like a day laborer, Schumann made a complete break with her toward the end of the year, due to his growing attraction to 15-year-old Clara Wieck. They made mutual declarations of love in December in Zwickau, where Clara appeared in concert. His budding romance with Clara was soon brought to an end when her father learned of their trysts during the Christmas holidays. He summarily forbade them further meetings and ordered all correspondence between them burnt. Carnaval. Carnaval, Op. 9 is one of Schumann's most characteristic piano works. Schumann begins nearly every section of Carnaval with a musical cryptogram, the musical note signified in German by the letters that spell Asch, the Bohemian town in which Ernestine was born, and the notes are also the musical letters in Schumann's own name. Yusbus and Florestan, the imaginary figures appearing so often in his critical writings, also appear, alongside brilliant imitations of Chopin and Paganini. The work comes to a close with the March of the Davids per 1/4 NDLERA the League of King David's Men against the Philistines in which may be heard the clear accents of truth in contrast with the dull clamour of falsehood embodied in a quotation from the 17th-century Grandfather's Dance. The march, a step nearly always in duple meter, is here in March 4th time. The work ends in joy and a degree of mock triumph. In Carnaval, Schumann went further than in Papillons, by conceiving the story as well as the musical representation. 1835 Euro 39, on October 3, 1835, Schumann met Felix Mendelssohn at Wieck's house in Leipzig, and his enthusiastic appreciation of that artist was shown with the same generous freedom that distinguished his acknowledgement of Chopin's greatness and most of his other colleagues, and which later prompted him to publicly pronounce the then unknown Johannes Brahms a genius. Despite the opposition of Clara's father, she and Robert continued a clandestine relationship which matured into a full-blown romance. In 1837, he asked her father's consent to their marriage, but was refused. Wieck ridiculed his daughter's wish to throw herself away on a penniless composer. In the series of piano pieces Fantasista 1/4 CKE, Op. 12, Schumann expresses the fusion of literary and musical ideas as embodied conceptions in such pieces as Warum, and in Der Nacht. After he had written the latter of these two, he detected in the music the fanciful suggestion of a series of episodes from the myth of Hero and Leander. The collection begins, in Des Abends, with a notable example of Schumann's predilection for rhythmic ambiguity, as unrelieved syncopation plays heavily against the time's signature, somewhat analogous to that of the first movement of Faschingschwank aus Wien. After a fable and the appropriately titled Dreams Confusion the collection ends on an introspective note in the manner of Yusbus. In 1837 Schumann published his symphonic studies, a complex set of a copyright-like variations written in 1834 1835, which demanded a finished piano technique. These variations were based on a theme by the adoptive father of Ernestine von Fricken. The work described as one of the peaks of the piano literature, lofty in conception and faultless in workmanship. Hutcheson was dedicated to the young English composer William Sterndale Bennett, for whom Schumann had had a high regard when they worked together in Leipzig. The Davids per 1/4 and Lehrte Currency NZE, Op. 6, literally Dances of the League of David, is an embodiment of the struggle between enlightened romanticism and musical philistinism. Schumann credited the two sides of his character with the composition of the work and the more dreamy signed E. The work begins with a motto of CW denoting her support for the ideals of the Davidsbund. The Bund was a work of Schumann's imagination, members of which were kindred spirits such as Chopin, Paganini and Clara, as well as the personalized Florestan and Yusbus. Kinderszenen, Op. 15, completed in 1838 and a favorite of Schumann's piano works, depicts the innocence and playfulness of childhood. The Currency Amare in F major, number 7 of the set, is one of the most famous piano pieces ever written, which has been performed in myriad forms and transcriptions. It has been the favorite encore of several great pianists, including Vladimir Horowitz. Melodic and deceptively simple, the piece has been described as complex in its harmonic structure. Kreilriana, Op. 16, considered one of Schumann's greatest works, carried his fantasy and emotional range deeper. Johannes Kreisler was the fictional poet created by poet E.T.A. Hoffmann, and characterized as a romantic brought into contact with reality. Schumann used the figure to express emotional states in music that is fantastic and mad. According to Hutcheson, this work is among the finest efforts of Schumann's genius. He never surpassed the searching beauty of the slow movements or the urgent passion of others. To appreciate it, a high level of aesthetic intelligence is required. This is no facile music, there is severity alike in its beauty and its passion. The Fantasie in C, Op. 17, composed in the summer of 1836, is a work of passion and deep pathos, imbued with the spirit of the late Beethoven. Schumann intended to use proceeds from sales of the work toward the construction of a monument to Beethoven. The first movement of the Fantasie contains a musical quote from Beethoven's song cycle, and Die Ferne Geliebte, Op. 98. The original titles of the movements were to be Ruins, Triumphal Arch, and the Starry Crown. According to Franz Liszt, who played the work for Schumann and to whom it was dedicated, the Fantasie was apt to be played too heavily, and should have a dreamier character than vigorous German pianists tended to impart. Liszt also said, "It is a noble work, worthy of Beethoven, whose career, by the way, it is supposed to represent." Again, according to Hutcheson, no words can describe the Fantasie, no quotations set forth the majesty of its genius. It must suffice to say that it is Schumann's greatest work in large form for piano solo. After a visit to Vienna, during which he discovered Franz Schubert's previously unknown Symphony No. 9 in C, in 1839 Schumann wrote the Festschwank aus Wien. Most of the joke is in the central section of the first movement, in which a thinly veiled reference is made to La Marseillaise. The festive mood does not preclude moments of melancholic introspection in the intermezzo. After a long and acrimonious legal battle with her father, Schumann married Clara Wieck on September 12, 1840, at Schaparagrafenfeld, the day before her 21st birthday. Had they waited another day, they would no longer have required her father's consent. Their marriage proved a remarkable business partnership, with Clara acting as an inspiration, critic, and confidant to her husband. Despite her delicate appearance, she was an extremely strong-willed and energetic woman, who kept up a demanding schedule of concert tours in between bearing multiple children. 2 years after they married, Friedrich Wieck at last reconciled himself with the couple, eager to see his grandchildren. 1840 Euro 49, in the years 1832 Euro 1839, Schumann had written almost exclusively for the piano, but in 1840 alone he wrote no less than 138 songs. Indeed 1840 is highly significant in Schumann's musical legacy despite his earlier deriding of works for piano and voice as inferior. Prior to the legal case and subsequent marriage, the lovers exchanged love letters and rendezvoused in secret. Robert would often wait in a cafe for hours in a nearby city just to see Clara for a few minutes after one of her concerts. The strain of this long courtship, and of its consummation, led to this great outpouring of Lieder. This is evident in Widmung, for example, where he uses the melody from Schubert's Ave Maria in the Postludio Euro in homage to Clara. Schumann's biographers have attributed the sweetness, the doubt and the despair of these songs to the varying emotions aroused by his love for Clara and the uncertainties of their future together. Robert and Clara had 8 children, Emile, who died at 1 year, Marie, Elise, Julie, Ludwig, Ferdinand, Eugenie, and Felix. His chief song cycles of this period were his settings of the Liederkreis of Joseph von Eichendorff, Op. 39. The Frauenlieb und Leben of Commisso, Op. 42. The Dichterliebe of Heine, Op. 48. And Mythen, a collection of songs, including poems by Goethe, Ra 1/4 Cket, Heine, Byron, Burns and more. The songs Belsatzer, Op. 57 and Die Beiden Grenadier, Op. 49, both to Heine's words, show Schumann at his best as a ballad writer, although the dramatic ballad is less congenial to him than the introspective lyric. The Op. 35, 40 and 9/8 sets, although less well known, also contain songs of lyric and dramatic quality. Franz Grillparzer said, "He has made himself a new ideal world in which he moves almost as he wills." Despite his achievements, Schumann received few tokens of honor. He was awarded a doctoral degree by the University of Jena in 1840, and in 1843 a professorship in the Conservatory of Music, which Felix Mendelssohn had founded in Leipzig that same year. On one occasion, accompanying his wife on a concert tour in Russia, Schumann was asked whether he too was a musician. He often harbored considerable resentment over Clara's success as a pianist, which exceeded his own reputation as a composer. In 1841 he wrote two of his four symphonies, No. 1 in B-flat, Op. 38, Spring, and No. 4 in D minor. He devoted 1842 to composing chamber music, including the piano quintet in E-flat, Op. 44, now one of his best-known and most admired works. The piano quartet and three-string quartets. In 1843 he wrote Paradise and the Peri, his first essay at concerted vocal music, an oratorio-style work based on Lalla Rookh by Thomas Moore. After this, his compositions were not confined to any one form during any particular period. The stage in his life when he was deeply engaged in setting Goethe's Faust to music was a critical one for his health. He spent the first half of 1844 with Clara on tour in Russia. On returning to Germany, he abandoned his editorial work and left Leipzig for Dresden, where he suffered from persistent nervous prostration. As soon as he began to work, he was seized with fits of shivering and an apprehension of death, experiencing an abhorrence of high places, all-metal instruments, and drugs. Schumann's diaries also state that he suffered perpetually from imagining that he had the note A5 sounding in his ears. His state of unease and neurasthenia is reflected in his symphony in C, numbered second, but third in order of composition, in which the composer explores states of exhaustion, obsession and depression, culminating in Beethovenian spiritual triumph. Also published in 1845 was his piano concerto in A minor, Op. 54, originally conceived and performed as a one-movement fantasy for piano and orchestra in 1841. It is one of the most popular and oft-recorded of all piano concertos. Pace Hutchison Schumann achieved a masterly work and we inherited the finest piano concertos since Mozart and Beethoven. In 1846, he felt he had recovered. In the winter, the Schumanns revisited Vienna, traveling to Prague and Berlin in the spring of 1847 and in the summer to Zwickau, where he was received with enthusiasm. This pleased him, since at that time he was famous in only Dresden and Leipzig. His only opera, Genoveva, Op. 81, was written in 1848. In it, Schumann attempted to abolish recitative, which he regarded as an interruption to the musical flow. The subject of Genoveva based on Ludwig Tieck and Christian Friedrich Hebele was not an ideal choice. The text is often considered to lack dramatic qualities. The work has not remained in the repertoire. As early as 1842 the possibilities of German opera had been keenly realized by Schumann, who wrote, "Do you know my prayer as an artist, night and morning? It is called German opera. Here is a real field for enterprise. Something simple, profound, German." And in his notebook of suggestions for the text of operas are found amongst others, Nibelungen, Lohengrin and Till Eulenspiegel. The music to Byron's Manfred was written in 1849, the overture of which is one of Schumann's most frequently performed orchestral works. The insurrection of Dresden caused Schumann to move to Kreischa, a little village a few miles outside the city. In August 1849, on the occasion of the centenary of Goethe's birth, such scenes of Schumann's scenes from Goethe's Faust as were already completed were performed in Dresden, Leipzig and Weimar. Liszt gave him assistance and encouragement. The rest of the work was written later in 1849, and the overture in 1853. After 1850, from 1850 to 1854, Schumann composed in a wide variety of genres. Critics have disputed the quality of his work at this time. A widely held view has been that his music showed signs of mental breakdown and creative decay. More recently, critics have suggested that the changes in style may be explained by lucid experimentation. In 1850, Schumann succeeded Ferdinand Hiller as musical director at Darwin Düsseldorf, but he was a poor conductor and quickly aroused the opposition of the musicians. According to Harold C. Schonberg, the great composer was impossible on the platform. There is something heartrending about poor Schumann's epochal inefficiency as a conductor. His contract was eventually terminated. From 1851 to 1853 he visited Switzerland, Belgium and Leipzig. In 1851 he completed his Symphony No. 3, Rhenish. He revised what would be published as his Fourth Symphony. On September 30, 1853, the 20-year-old composer Johannes Brahms arrived unannounced on the door of the Schumanns carrying a letter of introduction from violinist Joseph Joachim. Brahms amazed Clara and Robert with his music, stayed with them for several weeks, and became a close family friend. During this time Schumann, Brahms and Schumann's pupil Albert Dietrich collaborated on the composition of the FAE Sonata for Joachim. Schumann also published an article, Ne Bahnen in the Neue Zeitschrift, hailing the unknown young Brahms from Hamburg, a man who had published nothing, as the chosen one, who was destined to give ideal expression to the times. It was an extraordinary way to present Brahms to the musical world, setting up great expectations which he did not fulfill for many years. In January 1854, Schumann went to Hanover, where he heard a performance of his Paradise in the Peri organized by Joachim and Brahms. 2 years later at Schumann's request, the work received its first English performance conducted by William Sterndale Bennett. Schumann returned to Darwin Düsseldorf and began to edit his complete works and make an anthology on the subject of music. He suffered a renewal of the symptoms that had threatened him earlier. Besides the single note sounding in his ear, he imagined that voices sounded in his ear and he heard angelic music. One night he suddenly left his bed, having dreamt or imagined that a ghost had dictated a spirit theme to him. The theme was one he had used several times before, in his second string quartet, again in his Lieder album für one Quartet die Jugend, and finally in the slow movement of his violin concerto. In the days leading up to his suicide attempt, Schumann wrote 5 variations on this theme for the piano, his last published work, today known as the Geistervariationen. Brahms published it in a supplementary volume to the complete edition of Schumann's piano music. In 1861 Brahms published his Variations for Piano 4 Hands, Op. 23, based on this theme. In late February 1854, Schumann's symptoms increased, the angelic visions sometimes being replaced by demonic visions. He warned Clara that he feared he might do her harm. On February 27, 1854, he attempted suicide by throwing himself from a bridge into the Rhine River. Rescued by boatmen and taken home, he asked to be taken to an asylum for the insane. He entered Dr. Franz Reicharz's sanatorium in Indenisch, a quarter of Bonn, and remained there until he died on July 29, 1856 at the age of 46. During his confinement, he was not allowed to see Clara. She finally visited him 2 days before his death. He appeared to recognize her, but was unable to speak. Given his reported symptoms, one modern view is that his death was a result of syphilis, which he may have contracted during his student days, and which would have remained latent during most of his marriage. According to studies by the musicologist and literary scholar Eric Sams, Schumann's symptoms during his terminal illness and death appear consistent with those of mercury poisoning, mercury at this time being a common treatment for syphilis and other conditions. Another possibility is that his neurological problems were the result of an intracranial mass. A report by Janisch and Norhaus on Schumann's autopsy indicates that he had a gelatinous tumor at the base of the brain. It may have represented a colloid cyst, a craniopharyngioma, a chordoma, or a chordoid meningioma. In particular, meningiomas are known to produce musical auditory hallucinations, such as Schumann reported. Still other sources surmise that Schumann had bipolar disorder, citing his mood swings and changes in productivity. From the time of her husband's death, Clara devoted herself to the performance and interpretation of his works. In 1856, she first visited England, but the critics received Schumann's music coolly. Critics such as Henry Fothergill were particularly harsh in their disapproval. She returned to London in 1865 and made regular appearances there in later years. She became the authoritative editor of her husband's works for Breitkopf and Haar Currency RTEL. It was rumored that she and Brahms destroyed many of Schumann's later works, which they thought to be tainted by his madness. However, only the 5 pieces for cello and piano are known to have been destroyed. Most of Schumann's late works, particularly the Violin Concerto, the Fantasy for Violin and Orchestra and the Violin Sonata No. 3, all from 1853, have entered the repertoire. Legacy. Schumann had considerable influence in the 19th century and beyond, despite his adoption of more conservative modes of composition after his marriage. He left an array of acclaimed music in virtually all the forms then known. Partly through his proto-copyright copyright Brahms, Schumann's ideals and musical vocabulary became widely disseminated. Composer Sir Edward Elgar called Schumann my ideal. Schumann has not often been confused with Austrian composer Franz Schubert, but one well-known example occurred in 1956, when East Germany issued a pair of postage stamps featuring Schumann's picture against an open score that featured Schubert's music. The stamps were soon replaced by a pair featuring music written by Schumann. Compositions, list of compositions by Robert Schumann, category, compositions by Robert Schumann, fictional portrayals, Tra Currency Amereism UFA movie starring Matthias Wiemann as Schumann, Hilde Krall as Clara Wieck, Ulrich Haupt as Johannes Brahms, and Emil Lohkamp as Franz Liszt. Song of Love is an MGM film starring Paul Henreid as Schumann, Katharine Hepburn as Clara Wieck, Robert Walker as Johannes Brahms, and Henry Daniell as Franz Liszt. Peter Schumann's 1983 movie Fra un Quarterling Symphony tells the story of Robert and Clara's romance, against her father's opposition. Robert was played by Herbert Graf Paragrafmir, Clara by Nastas Jakinski, and Clara's father by Rolf Hopp. The role of Nicola Squared Paganini was played by the violinist Jürgen Kramer. The score was written by Graf Paragrafmir and conducted by Wolfgang Sawallisch. The Andrew Crumey novel Mobius Dick has a chapter depicting Schumann at Indenisch. Seinfeld. Robert Schumann is mentioned in a 1991 episode of Seinfeld the Jacket. Juliet Clara was a 2008 Franco-German-Hungarian film about the lives of Clara and Robert. Notes. References: Deverio, J., Robert Schumann, Grove Music Online, L. Macy, Access June 24, 2007, Ostwald, Peter, Schumann The Inner Voices of a Musical Genius, Northeastern University Press, Boston, 1985 ISBN 1-55553-014-1. Scholes, Persia, The Oxford Companion to Music, 10th edition, Oxford University Press, Oxford, 1970 ISBN 0193113066. Fuller Maitland, John Alexander Schumann S. Lowe, Marston, Searle and Rivington, Ostwald, Peter. Schumann, The Inner Voices of a Musical Genius. Northeastern University Press. ISBN A1-55553-014-1. Perret, Beat. The Cambridge Companion to Schumann. Cambridge University Press. ISBN A0-521-78950-8. Rice C., Lynn. The Piano Teaching of Walter Hochzig with 613 examples from the works of Beethoven, Schubert, Schumann, and Chopin, Edwin Mellen Press. ISBN 0-7734-4981-7, Tunbridge, Laura. Schumann's Late Style. Cambridge University Press. ISBN A978-0-521-87168-6. Worthen, John. Robert Schumann, Life and Death of a Musician. Yale University Press. ISBN A0-300-11160-6. The author argues that the composer was mentally normal all his life, until the sudden onset of insanity near the end resulting from tertiary syphilis. External links, Life and Works, more on Robert Schumann and his life, Robert Schumann the world's greatest composer. A personal appreciation, complete list of works, musical rules at home and in life. A text by Robert Schumann, works by or about Robert Schumann in libraries, German label Trubadisc with SACD release and biography of Robert Schumann, Schumann Portal, Zahlcurrency Akademie der Wissenschaften zu Leipzig. Edition of all letters written by Robert and Clara Schumann, the Lied and Art Song Texts page. Created and maintained from Emily Azar's texts of Schumann's Lieder with translations in various languages. The City of Robert Schumann, listings of live performances at Backtrack, Robert and Clara Schumann and their teacher, Johann Sebastian Bach, Sheet music, printable Schumann's piano score and PDF, free scores by Robert Schumann at the International Music Score Library Project, free scores by Robert Schumann in the Choral Public Domain Library, Schumann's scores by Mutopia Project, works by Robert Schumann at Project Gutenberg, recordings and MIDI, Schumann's cylinder recordings, from the Cylinder Preservation and Digitization Project at the University of California, Santa Barbara Library. Recording of Kinderszenen, works for organ or pedal piano by Schumann played on a virtual organ, selected leader, Kunst der Fuge Robert Schumann Euro MIDI files, Herbert von Karajan / Vienna Philharmonic rehearse the Fourth Symphony on YouTube.